You've had the right idea at the wrong moment and watched someone else get the credit when timing shifted in their favor. Every day you see opportunities that could transform your career, but by the time you act, the moment has passed and you're left wondering why others seem to know exactly when to make their move. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who mastered timing on the battlefield, where a single moment's hesitation meant the difference between victory and death. What I discovered about perfect timing will transform how you recognize and seize the decisive moments that determine success, giving you the ability to strike when victory is inevitable and retreat when patience serves you better. The battlefield may have changed from ancient China to modern opportunities, but the principles of recognizing the perfect moment remain as powerful today as they were 2,500 years ago. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless strategic wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of perfect timing. Let me tell you about the moment that changed everything I thought I knew about warfare and about timing. I was 23 years old, commanding my first significant siege against the fortress city of Kuwaiti. I had studied every military text, memorized every formation, and prepared for months. My army was disciplined, my strategy was flawless, and my confidence was absolute. What I didn't understand was that perfect preparation means nothing without perfect timing. I carry with me still the silk banner that flew over that failed siege, my father's war banner, passed down through 3 generations of military leaders. That banner should have flown over victory. Instead, it became my greatest teacher about the weight of a single moment. The siege had lasted 6 weeks. My scouts reported that the enemy was running low on supplies. Their morale was breaking, and cracks had appeared in the eastern wall. Everything pointed to victory being within our grasp. I had 2 choices: wait another week for the wall to weaken further, or strike immediately while their spirits were lowest. I chose to strike. At dawn, I gave the order to attack. My troops moved with precision, ladders against the walls, battering rams against the gates. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. Then the unexpected happened. Enemy reinforcements arrived from the north. Troops I hadn't accounted for because my timing was off by a single day. What I learned in that crushing defeat was that I had focused entirely on my own readiness and completely ignored the rhythm of larger forces at play. I had been watching the fortress while missing the broader strategic picture. The enemy commander had timed his reinforcements' arrival perfectly. Knowing that an eager young general would attack too soon, the battle turned in a matter of minutes. What should have been a glorious victory became a devastating retreat. Lost 300 men that day, good soldiers, who died because their commander didn't understand that timing isn't about when you're ready to act, but when the world is ready for your action. As I watched my father's banner torn and bloodied in the mud, I realized that all my preparation, all my strategy, all my strength had been rendered meaningless by poor timing. I had been like a farmer planting seeds in winter, wondering why nothing would grow. That night, as I sat in my tent contemplating resignation, I made a vow that changed the course of my life. I would master timing the way I had mastered strategy. I would learn to read not just the obvious signs, but the invisible currents that determine when action succeeds and when it fails. This is the same mistake I see leaders make today in boardrooms and career decisions. They prepare thoroughly, they strategize brilliantly, they work tirelessly, but they launch their initiatives, make their moves, and present their ideas at the wrong moment. They pitch to investors when the market is shifting. They ask for promotions when budgets are being cut. They introduce changes when their teams are already overwhelmed. Perfect preparation without perfect timing is like having the best key for the wrong lock. You can push and struggle and force all you want, but until you find the right moment when all the tumblers of circumstance align, your efforts will fail. After my devastating defeat at Kueiji, I became obsessed with understanding what I had missed. How had the enemy commander known exactly when to expect my attack? How had he timed his reinforcements so perfectly? I realized that while I had been watching the obvious troop movements, wall damage, supply levels, he had been reading something deeper, something invisible. I spent the next 3 years studying under Master Chen, an elderly strategist who had never lost a battle in 40 years of service. He taught me about the bronze water clock that sits before me now as I share this wisdom with you. This ancient timepiece taught me that true timing isn't measured in hours or days, but in the rhythm of human nature and the flow of invisible forces. Master Chen would wake me before dawn each day and take me to observe not battles, but life itself. We watched farmers in their fields, merchants in their markets, mothers with their children. Tell me, he would say, when will that farmer rest? When will that merchant close his stall? When will that mother lose patience with her child? At first, I thought these exercises were pointless. What did farmers and merchants have to do with military strategy? But gradually, I began to see patterns, rhythms of energy, attention, and emotion that governed all human behavior. The farmer rested when his energy naturally dipped after the morning's most intensive work. The merchant closed when foot traffic slowed and his attention began to waver. The mother's patience had a predictable cycle based on her child's behavior and her own emotional state. Now, Master Chen said after months of these observations, apply this to your enemies. They too have rhythms of energy, attention, and emotion. Victory comes not when you are ready, but when they are vulnerable to your readiness. This was my first glimpse into the 3 invisible forces that create perfect timing. The first force is energy, both yours and your opponent's. Energy rises and falls in predictable patterns. There are moments when your energy is at its peak and theirs is at its lowest. Those moments are windows of opportunity. The second force is attention. In any situation, people can only focus on a limited number of things at once. When their attention is scattered or focused elsewhere, that's when your move has the greatest chance of success. I learned to watch for signs of divided attention in enemy commanders when they were dealing with supply problems, political pressures, or internal conflicts. The third force is emotion. Fear, confidence, anger, desperation. These emotions create their own timing. A desperate enemy is dangerous but predictable. A confident enemy is strong but often careless. An angry enemy makes mistakes but fights fiercely. Understanding the emotional state of all parties involved tells you not just what they'll do, but when they'll do it. I remember the siege of Ying, where I first successfully applied these principles. For weeks, I watched the enemy commander's patterns. I noticed his energy was highest in the morning, his attention most scattered during the evening meal preparations, and his confidence was growing dangerous. Instead of attacking when I was ready, I waited for the convergence morning when supply problems had drained his energy. Political messengers had divided his attention, and overconfidence had made him careless. When those 3 forces aligned, we took the city in 2 hours with minimal casualties. In today's world, these same invisible currents determine the success of every important conversation, negotiation, and career move. Before you ask for that promotion, read the energy levels of your boss, the attention demands they're juggling, and their emotional state about the company's direction. Before you launch that project, sense whether your team's energy is rising or falling, whether organizational attention is focused or scattered, and whether the emotional climate supports or resists change. Most people time their actions based on external schedules, calendar deadlines, fiscal quarters, planned meetings, but masters of timing read the invisible currents and move when those currents create the perfect moment for their success. Understanding the invisible currents was only the beginning. The greater challenge became maintaining the state of readiness required to act when those currents aligned. I learned this lesson through the scrolls I still keep with my battle plans that proved being ready isn't enough. You must be ready for the right moment. There is a crucial difference between being prepared and being ready. Preparation is what you do in advance, gathering resources, making plans, building skills. Readiness is a state of being that allows you to act instantly when opportunity presents itself. Most people confuse the two, and this confusion costs them their greatest opportunities. I developed what I call the doctrine of readiness during my campaigns in the Wu territory. For months, I had been preparing for a decisive battle against General Zhou, a brilliant commander known for his unpredictable tactics. I had studied his previous battles, trained my troops in counter formations, and stockpiled supplies. I was thoroughly prepared. But when the moment came when scouts reported that Zhou's army was divided and vulnerable while crossing a river, I hesitated. My troops weren't in their assigned positions. My supplies were organized for a different type of engagement. My mind was focused on the elaborate plan I had prepared, not the simple opportunity that presented itself. By the time I reorganized my forces to take advantage of Zhou's vulnerability, the moment had passed. His army had crossed the river and regrouped. What should have been a swift victory became a prolonged campaign lasting 6 months. That failure taught me that readiness requires a different mindset than preparation. Preparation is specific and detailed. Readiness is flexible and responsive. Preparation says, I have a plan for everything. Readiness says, I can adapt to anything. From that point forward, I developed a personal system for maintaining constant readiness. Every morning, I would review not just my plans, but my capacity to abandon those plans if opportunity demanded it. I trained my mind to recognize opportunity windows, those brief periods when the invisible currents of energy, attention, and emotion created perfect conditions for action. This mental training involved daily exercises. I would imagine sudden opportunities appearing: enemy weakness, ally strength, environmental advantage. Practice the mental shift from whatever I was currently focused on to seizing that opportunity. I discovered that the mind, like the body, could be trained for quick response. I also learned to maintain what I call strategic availability, keeping portions of my resources, attention, and energy uncommitted so they could be rapidly deployed when timing demanded it. Most commanders committed everything to their primary plan. I learned to hold back reserves, not just of troops and supplies, but of mental focus and decision-making capacity. The cost of unreadiness became clear during the Battle of Changping. An Allied commander had achieved a breakthrough that could have ended the war in our favor, but his success created an unexpected opportunity for a flanking maneuver. He sent urgent word requesting immediate support. I had the troops available, but they were committed to a different operation. I had the supplies, but they were allocated elsewhere. I had the authority to make the decision, but my attention was focused on my own tactical concerns. By the time I recognized the opportunity and reallocated my resources, the moment had passed. The enemy had reinforced their position, and what could have been a war-ending victory became merely another tactical success. This taught me that preparation without readiness leads to waste. You gather resources you can't deploy, develop skills you can't apply, and create opportunities you can't seize. You become like an archer with perfect aim, but no ability to draw the bow when the target appears. In today's fast-moving world, this principle is more crucial than ever. Markets shift. Overnight, technologies emerge suddenly. Organizational priorities change without warning. The leaders who succeed are not necessarily those who plan the best, but those who maintain the readiness to act when unexpected opportunities arise. Building your personal readiness system means developing the ability to quickly shift focus, rapidly reallocate resources, and make sound decisions under time pressure. It means keeping part of your energy and attention available for the unexpected. It means practicing the mental flexibility to abandon your current plan when a better opportunity presents itself. Most importantly, it means training yourself to recognize opportunity windows when they appear, because perfect timing combined with unreadiness is just another missed opportunity. In my hands rests a smooth river stone, worn by countless years of water flowing over its surface. I carried this meditation stone through every campaign, and it became my teacher in perhaps the most difficult aspect of perfect timing, the art of patience. This stone taught me that some of the greatest victories come not from acting quickly, but from having the discipline to wait when every instinct screams for action. My greatest military triumph was born from 3 months of waiting that nearly drove me to madness. The fortress of Yu stood before my army like an impregnable mountain, its walls rising from sheer cliffs, its gates protected by deep ravines. My generals urged immediate assault. My soldiers grew restless with inaction. My own reputation suffered, as rumors spread that I had lost my nerve. But I had observed something others missed. The fortress drew its water from underground springs that fed a network of cisterns. Heavy rains had been filling these cisterns all spring, but summer was approaching, and I knew that by late summer, those springs would run low. The question was whether I had the patience to wait for nature to become my ally, or whether I would yield to the pressure for immediate action. Every day during those 3 months, I faced the same internal battle. My mind would construct compelling reasons to attack immediately. The men were ready. Supplies were adequate. Delay might allow enemy reinforcements to arrive. The longer we waited, the more time our opponents had to strengthen their defenses. But each evening, I would hold this stone and remember the lesson of the river that shaped it. The river didn't force its way through the rock by rushing faster or pushing harder. It simply maintained constant, patient pressure over time until the rock yielded to its persistence. During the siege of Yu, I watched my enemies make every mistake that impatience creates. They sorted from the fortress repeatedly, trying to break our siege lines. Each sortie cost them men they couldn't afford to lose. They sent desperate messages requesting aid, revealing their supply situation to our intercepted messengers. Most importantly, they began rationing water, confirming what I suspected about their underground springs. By late summer, when the springs ran dry and their systems emptied, the fortress that had seemed impregnable 3 months earlier surrendered without a fight. What could have cost thousands of lives in a direct assault was achieved with patience and the loss of fewer than 50 men to skirmishers. The discipline required to wait when action feels urgent is perhaps the hardest skill I ever developed. Human nature rebels against inaction when we see opportunity or feel pressure. Our minds create urgency when none exists. Our emotions demand that we do something even when doing nothing is the wisest course. I learned to distinguish between real urgency and manufactured urgency. Real urgency comes from genuine, time-sensitive opportunity. The enemy truly is vulnerable now and won't be tomorrow. Manufactured urgency comes from our own impatience, social pressure, or fear of being seen as inactive. During those 3 months at Yu, I faced manufactured urgency daily. Criticism from my superiors who wanted visible progress, complaints from soldiers who wanted action, doubts from myself about whether I was being patient or merely indecisive. I had to develop inner certainty about my timing assessment while remaining open to new information that might change that assessment. The key insight was learning that patience isn't passive. True strategic patience involves constant observation, continuous assessment, and active preparation for the moment when patience ends and action begins. While I waited for the springs to run dry, my scouts monitored enemy activity. My engineers prepared siege equipment, and my strategists developed multiple attack plans for different scenarios. This same principle applies to every important decision. In modern life, the executive who waits for market conditions to improve before launching a new product isn't being passive. They're actively monitoring indicators and preparing for the optimal launch window. The professional who delays asking for a promotion isn't being timid, they're building their case and waiting for their boss's attention to focus on performance reviews rather than budget crises. Most people today struggle with patience because modern life rewards speed and punishes delay. We're conditioned to believe that faster is always better, that any delay is lost opportunity. But masters of timing understand that premature action often destroys the very opportunities we're trying to seize. The art of patience is knowing when to wait, how long to wait, and what to do while waiting. It's maintaining strategic stillness while remaining ready for strategic action. It's having the confidence to let time work in your favor instead of feeling compelled to work against time. Before me lies an eagle feather, brown and gold with intricate patterns that catch the light. I found this feather on the morning of my greatest victory, and it taught me that perfect timing often announces itself through subtle signs that most people overlook completely. Learning to recognize these signs, what I call the heralds of the perfect moment, became as crucial as learning patience itself. The Battle of Buyu changed everything I understood about reading timing signals. For weeks, my army had been maneuvering against the forces of King Fukai, a cunning opponent who had never lost a major engagement. Our forces were evenly matched, our positions equally strong. No conventional analysis suggested that either side had a decisive advantage. But on the morning I found this eagle feather, I noticed something that would have been invisible to most commanders. As dawn broke over our camp, I observed the enemy sentries through my field glass. Their posture was different, not dramatically, but subtly. Where before they had stood alert and focused, now they leaned against their posts, their attention wandering. Their relief rotations, previously precise, had become irregular by mere minutes. These were micro-expressions of an army whose confidence had shifted overnight. Something had happened in their camp, perhaps a delayed supply train, perhaps disturbing news from home, perhaps simply the accumulated weight of prolonged campaign stress. The signs were subtle: a sentry yawning at his post, officers taking longer to respond to routine signals, the general rhythm of camp activity running just slightly slower than before. Most commanders would have dismissed these observations as meaningless details, but I had learned to read what I call the 3-second window, those brief moments when an opponent's true state becomes visible before their training and discipline reassert control. I had developed this skill through years of studying not just enemy armies, but individual soldiers, local officials, and even animals. A horse will signal its intentions 3 seconds before it acts. A slight shift in weight, a change in ear position, a subtle tension in its muscles. Humans do the same thing. Their authentic emotional and mental state leaks through their controlled exterior in brief, telltale moments. During negotiations with local governors, I learned to watch for these micro-signals: the slight hesitation before agreeing to terms, the brief tension around the eyes when discussing sensitive topics, the momentary relaxation when they felt they had gained an advantage. These 3-second windows revealed more about their true position than hours of formal discussion at Buju. I recognized that the enemy's microsignals indicated a fundamental shift in their psychological state. Their confidence was wavering, their attention was scattered, their energy was declining. But these conditions were temporary. Within hours, discipline would reassert itself, or new information would restore their confidence, or rest would renew their energy. I had perhaps a 4-hour window to act while these conditions persisted. I immediately ordered our forces into attack formation, not because our strategic position had improved, but because their psychological position had deteriorated in ways that only careful observation could detect. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended in complete victory. Later, I learned that disturbing news from the capital had indeed reached their camp the night before, political developments that threatened their family's security. This news had undermined their fighting spirit in subtle but decisive ways. That affected everything from sentry alertness to command, decision-making. This taught me that perfect timing often disguises itself as ordinary circumstances. The moment when your boss is most receptive to your proposal might look like any other Tuesday morning. Except for subtle signs, they're responding to emails more quickly than usual. Their office door is open when it's normally closed. They're asking more questions about project details than they typically do. The moment when a client is ready to sign might appear to be just another meeting. Except for microsignals, they're leaning forward slightly instead of back. They're asking about implementation timeline instead of questioning cost. They're using when instead of if in their language. Training your perception to catch these timing signals requires deliberate practice. Start by observing the people you interact with regularly. Notice their patterns of energy, attention, and mood throughout the day, the week, the month. Learn to distinguish between their controlled, professional demeanor and the authentic emotions that leak through in unguarded moments. Most importantly, develop the confidence to act on these observations. The tendency is to dismiss subtle signals and wait for obvious ones. But obvious signals are visible to everyone, which means the competitive advantage disappears. Perfect timing belongs to those who can read the subtle signs and have the courage to act on them. The eagle that dropped this feather saw something from its high vantage point the ground-bound creatures missed. Perfect timing requires developing that elevated perspective, the ability to see patterns and signals that others overlook because they're focused on more obvious indicators. The blade before me is my personal sword, forged by the master weaponsmith, Lu Ban. Its edge remains sharp after decades of use because it was designed for one purpose: to move faster than thought when the perfect moment arrived. This sword taught me that recognizing the moment is worthless unless you can act with lightning speed when patience ends and the time for action begins. My fastest military victory lasted exactly 57 minutes from the first signal to complete enemy surrender. The campaign against the rebel warlord Chen had dragged on for 2 months, with neither side able to gain decisive advantage. Chen was positioned in a mountain stronghold that seemed impregnable, and his forces had proven resilient in every engagement. But on a foggy morning in late autumn, my scouts reported something unusual. The fog was so thick that visibility was reduced to mere yards, and Chen's sentries couldn't see beyond their immediate posts. More importantly, the fog was moving a weather pattern that would lift suddenly when the sun reached a certain angle, but only for about an hour before afternoon clouds rolled in. I had been watching this weather pattern for 3 days, and I knew that when the fog lifted, there would be a narrow window when Chen's forces would be temporarily blinded by the sudden brightness, while my troops, positioned with the sun at their backs, would have perfect visibility. The moment would last perhaps 60 minutes before the afternoon weather shift eliminated our advantage. When the fog began to thin, I had less than 10 minutes to position 5,000 men for an assault that had to begin within seconds of the fog clearing completely. There was no time for detailed briefings, no opportunity to adjust the plan, no possibility of hesitation. The moment demanded instant, decisive action. This is where most leaders fail. They recognize the opportunity but hesitate in execution. They second-guess their timing assessment. They want to verify conditions one more time. They seek consensus from advisors. They try to perfect their approach. Meanwhile, the window closes and the opportunity vanishes. I had learned that perfect timing requires what I call the speed of strike. the ability to move from observation to action faster than your opponent can adapt to changing conditions. This speed isn't just physical, it's mental, emotional, and organizational. Mental speed means making decisions based on available information without waiting for perfect information. When the fog began lifting at Buju, I had perhaps 80% certainty that conditions would develop as I anticipated. Waiting for 100% certainty would have meant missing the opportunity entirely. Emotional speed means acting despite inner resistance. Every instinct screamed that attacking into fog was madness. Months of conditioning said that careful, methodical approaches were safer. Fear whispered that failure would destroy my reputation. I had to override all these emotional breaks and trust my timing assessment. Organizational speed means having systems and people prepared to execute complex actions without lengthy coordination. My officers knew that when I gave the signal, they had minutes to deploy their units according to predetermined plans. No questions, no clarifications, no delays. The assault began the moment visibility cleared. My archers, positioned on high ground, had perfect sight lines to enemy positions that had been invisible minutes before. My cavalry struck from 3 directions simultaneously, taking advantage of confusion created by the sudden change in conditions. My infantry advanced with precision timing that gave Chen's forces no opportunity to organize a coordinated defense. In 57 minutes, the stronghold that had resisted 2 months of siege warfare was completely overrun. Chen surrendered. Rather than see his remaining forces slaughtered in a battle they couldn't possibly win. The key insight was that hesitation kills perfect timing more decisively than any other factor. When all the conditions align, when energy, attention, and emotion create the perfect moment, you have a brief window to act before those conditions shift again. Overthinking during this window is fatal. I developed what I call the 10-second rule. When I recognized that perfect timing had arrived, I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to verify my assessment and commit to action. Not 10 minutes or 10 hours, 10 seconds. This forced me to trust my preparation and training rather than trying to analyze my way to certainty. This principle applies directly to modern leadership challenges. When market conditions create an opportunity for expansion, when organizational changes open doors for advancement, when client relationships reach the decision point, these moments demand swift action, not prolonged analysis. The executive who recognizes that their company is ready for a bold, strategic shift but spends weeks building consensus will watch competitors seize the opportunity. The professional who sees that their boss is finally receptive to their proposal but waits for the perfect presentation will discover that the receptive moment has passed. Speed of strike doesn't mean recklessness. It means doing your analysis and preparation during the patient waiting period, so that when the moment arrives, you can act with trained instinct rather than conscious deliberation. Like this sword, you must be ready to cut cleanly and decisively when the perfect moment presents itself. The bronze horn beside me carries a sound that saved my army from destruction and taught me one of timing's most difficult lessons, knowing when not to engage. This retreat horn represents perfect timing in its most challenging form, the wisdom to withdraw when conditions aren't right, even when withdrawal appears to be weakness or failure. My most important retreat came during the campaign against General Wei, a formidable opponent whose tactical brilliance had earned him victories against forces twice the size of his own. For weeks, our armies had maneuvered for position in the river valleys south of the capital. My advisors were unanimous we had achieved superior positioning and should attack immediately. Everything visible suggested they were right. Our forces outnumbered Wei's 3-2. We held the high ground. Our supply lines were secure while his appeared stretched. The weather favored our cavalry. By every conventional measure, the moment for attack had arrived, but something felt wrong. The invisible currents I had learned to read were sending contradictory signals. Wei's army moved with a confidence that seemed inconsistent with their apparent disadvantage. His scouts were more active than defensive positioning required. Most troubling, his forces had withdrawn just enough to invite our attack without appearing to flee. I faced the most difficult decision a commander can make: whether to trust analysis or intuition, whether to act on visible advantages or invisible warnings. My reputation demanded attack. My officers expected attack. My soldiers were prepared for attack. Yet every instinct screamed that this was exactly what Wei wanted. The pressure to engage was enormous. Retreat would be seen as cowardice by my own forces and weakness by the enemy. It would damage morale and invite future aggression. It would disappoint superiors who expected decisive action. Every rational argument favored immediate attack. But I had learned that perfect timing includes knowing when the moment is wrong, as surely as knowing when it's right. Sometimes the most perfectly timed action is the action you don't take. I ordered a strategic withdrawal, just as my officers were expecting the signal to attack. The confusion and disappointment in my ranks was palpable. Some questioned my courage. Others suggested I had lost my tactical instincts. The retreat horn sounded across a battlefield where no battle had begun. 3 days later, we discovered why my timing instincts had been correct. Wei had laid an elaborate trap, positioning hidden reserves in the hills behind his apparent location. Our scouts, despite their skill, had missed a cleverly concealed force that would have struck our flanks the moment we committed to frontal assault. What appeared to be our advantage had been carefully orchestrated to become our destruction. Had I attacked when conditions looked perfect, I would have led my army into a masterly ambush that would have ended my military career and cost thousands of lives. By trusting timing instincts over tactical analysis, we avoided a catastrophic defeat and lived to fight under genuinely favorable conditions. This taught me that perfect timing requires the courage to disappoint expectations, including your own. The hardest timing decisions are often about restraint rather than action. It's easier to act when you should wait than to wait when others expect you to act. I developed what I call the internal resistance test. When external pressure for action was strongest, I would examine my internal resistance most carefully. Was my hesitation based on fear and uncertainty, or was it based on timing instincts that detected unfavorable conditions, invisible to conventional analysis? Fear-based hesitation feels chaotic and anxious. It produces endless second-guessing and paralysis. Timing-based hesitation feels centered and alert. It produces patient observation and preparation for better conditions. The key insight was learning that strategic withdrawal often sets up strategic advance. By refusing to engage under Wei's preferred conditions, we forced him to reveal his hand and eventually engage under conditions that favored us. 3 weeks later, when his hidden reserves were elsewhere and his tactical position was genuinely weak, we achieved complete victory with minimal casualties. This principle applies powerfully to modern career and business decisions. Sometimes, the promotion opportunity that looks perfect is actually a trap role that sets you up for failure or positions you for blame. Sometimes the investment that everyone says you must make immediately is priced to benefit sellers rather than buyers. Sometimes the partnership that promises instant results will create long-term problems. Masters of timing know when to say no to apparently good opportunities, because their timing instincts detect unfavorable conditions that aren't immediately visible. They have the courage to disappoint others' expectations and face criticism for inaction when their assessment says the moment is wrong. The most successful leaders I've observed share this quality. They're as decisive about what not to do as they are about what to do. They time their withdrawals as carefully as their advances. They understand that preserving resources and position for the right moment is more valuable than committing them to the wrong moment. Perfect timing means knowing when to sound the retreat horn as surely as knowing when to sound the charge. This simple stone before me changed how I understood the relationship between timing and power. I used this lever stone to demonstrate to my officers how the right fulcrum point could allow a single man to move a boulder that 10 men couldn't budge by brute force. Perfect timing, I discovered, works the same way. It multiplies your natural abilities far beyond what direct effort alone could achieve. My smallest army achieved my greatest victory through this principle of multiplication. We were pursuing the rebel leader Shao through mountainous terrain with only 800 men against his force of nearly 3,000. By every measure of conventional warfare, we were outmatched and should have waited for reinforcements. But I had observed something that transformed our disadvantage into opportunity. Zhao's forces were strung out along a narrow mountain pass, moving in a long column that would take over an hour to traverse completely. More importantly, they were moving during the hottest part of the day, when men and horses tire quickly in the mountain sun. Instead of attacking the column directly, which would have been suicide, I positioned my forces at 3 strategic points along the pass. The timing had to be perfect. We would strike the front, middle, and rear of the column simultaneously, but only when their fatigue peaked and their attention was most scattered by the heat and the difficulty of the terrain. I waited until the precise moment when the lead elements had begun the steepest part of the ascent, when the middle sections were navigating the most treacherous footing, and when the rear guard was still climbing the initial slope. At that moment, Zhao's 3,000 men were effectively 3 separate forces of 1,000 each, unable to support each other and each dealing with different tactical challenges. When we struck, our 800 men were fighting 3 battles against forces of roughly equal size, but forces that were exhausted, separated, and caught completely off guard. The multiplication effect was dramatic. Our timing had transformed a 1-to-4 disadvantage into 3 separate 1-to-1 engagements under conditions that favored us completely. The entire engagement lasted 90 minutes and ended with Zhao's surrender. What should have been an impossible victory became almost effortless because timing had multiplied our effective strength by a factor of 10. This taught me that perfect timing doesn't just create opportunities, it multiplies the power of whatever efforts you apply to those opportunities. The same proposal that gets ignored in March gets enthusiastic approval in June. The same product that fails in a crowded market becomes a breakthrough success when market conditions shift. The same leadership style that creates resistance during stable times inspires loyalty during crisis. The multiplication effect occurs because timing aligns multiple forces in your favor simultaneously. When I struck Zhao's column, I wasn't just attacking tired soldiers, was attacking tired soldiers who were separated from support, dealing with difficult terrain, caught by surprise, and unable to coordinate their response. Each factor amplified the others. In modern contexts, this multiplication principle appears everywhere. The salesperson who calls just after their prospect has had a frustrating experience with a competitor doesn't just get attention, they get motivated attention from someone actively seeking alternatives. The employee who proposes a cost-saving initiative, just as budget pressures are mounting, doesn't just get heard, they get championed by leaders desperate for solutions. The key to harnessing this multiplication effect is learning to recognize when multiple favorable factors are converging. Most people focus on single variables. Is the market ready? Is my boss available? Are my skills adequate? Masters of timing watch for moments when several favorable conditions align simultaneously. I developed what I call the convergence assessment. Before any major action, I would identify the key factors that could amplify my efforts: environmental conditions, opponent state, ally availability, resource abundance, information advantage, and emotional climate. Perfect timing occurred when at least 4 of these factors aligned favorably at Zhao's pass. Environmental conditions favored us, mountain terrain that separated enemy forces. Opponent's state was declining, fatigue and distraction. Ally availability was maximized, small force could be coordinated precisely. Resource advantage was optimized, positioning negated enemy numerical superiority. Information advantage was complete, we knew their route and timing. An emotional climate was favorable, our troops were motivated by the prospect of victory. Against impossible odds, the compound effect of well-timed actions extends far beyond the immediate result. That victory against Zhao didn't just eliminate a rebel threat, it established my reputation for achieving impossible victories, which influenced how future opponents approached conflicts with me. Many surrendered without fighting because they believed I could multiply force through superior timing. In your career, this same compound effect operates. The project you complete perfectly during a crucial company moment doesn't just advance that initiative, it establishes your reputation as someone who delivers when it matters most. The relationship you build just before someone gets promoted doesn't just create one useful connection, it positions you in the network of their future. Influence. Understanding timing as a force multiplier changes how you approach every important decision. Instead of asking whether you're strong enough to succeed, you ask when your strength will be multiplied by favorable conditions. Instead of waiting until you feel powerful enough to act, you wait until timing makes your existing power sufficient for success. Like this leverstone, perfect timing gives you the fulcrum point where small efforts create large results. The question isn't whether you have enough force, it's whether you're applying that force at the moment when it will be multiplied. Most dramatically, the tattered banner before me tells a cautionary tale about one of timing's most dangerous traps, the false dawn that deceives you into acting too early. This banner was raised prematurely during the Battle of Shaoyang, where apparent urgency masked the need for patience and nearly cost me everything I had built as a strategist. General Liu was a master of creating false urgency. He understood that skilled opponents could be defeated not by superior force, but by being tricked into moving at the wrong time. Our armies had been maneuvering for weeks, and I had been patiently waiting for the right moment to engage his main force. Then his scouts began appearing everywhere. Enemy raiding parties struck our supply lines. Intelligence reports suggested he was preparing for a major assault. Most concerning, refugees began streaming from villages in his path, reporting that Liu was advancing rapidly toward our position. Every sign screamed that I needed to act immediately. My officers urged me to strike before Liu could complete his preparations. My allies pressured me to attack before enemy reinforcements arrived. Even my own strategic instincts seemed to confirm that delay would be catastrophic. So I ordered the attack, raising this banner as the signal for full engagement. My forces moved with precision and determination, striking what appeared to be Liu's main force at what seemed to be the perfect moment. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. Then I discovered the deception. What I had attacked was an elaborate decoy, small force dressed to appear larger, positioned to seem more significant than it was. Liu's real army was elsewhere, and by committing to this premature assault, I had revealed my own position and intentions, while achieving nothing of value. More damaging than the tactical failure was the psychological impact. My men had prepared for decisive battle and instead found themselves fighting shadows. The energy and momentum that had built during our approach was wasted on an insignificant engagement. Worst of all, Liu now knew exactly where we were and how we intended to fight. This taught me one of timing's cruelest lessons. Apparent opportunities often mask the need for patience. The very conditions that seemed to demand immediate action are sometimes manufactured to prevent you from waiting for genuinely favorable timing. I learned to distinguish between real urgency and manufactured urgency by developing what I call the pressure test. When external pressure for immediate action was strongest, I would ask 3 questions. Who benefits most from my acting right now? What would I see if this urgency were artificially created? What am I not seeing while focused on apparent opportunity? Real urgency benefits you and costs your opposition. If acting immediately serves your opponent's interests more than yours, the urgency is likely manufactured. Real urgency shows consistent evidence from multiple independent sources. If all your information about timing comes from sources your opponent could influence, treat it with suspicion. Most importantly, real urgency doesn't require you to abandon your strategic principles. If the apparent opportunity demands that you ignore everything you know about proper timing, it's probably a trap. During my recovery from the Shaoyang mistake, I had opportunity to observe Liu's deception techniques. He was masterful at creating false timing signals. He would concentrate forces visibly while moving his real strength invisibly. He would create apparent weaknesses that disappeared when attacked. He would generate intelligence that suggested immediate action was necessary when patience would have served his enemies better. The most sophisticated deception was his use of genuine, partial information to create false conclusions. The scouts, raids, and refugee reports were all real, but they represented minor activities designed to simulate major movements. By giving us accurate details about insignificant events, he made us draw incorrect conclusions about significant trends in today's business and career environments. This same dynamic appears constantly. Market volatility creates apparent urgency to make investment decisions that serve sellers more than buyers. Organizational changes generate pressure to make career moves that benefit managers more than employees. Competitive activity suggests need for immediate response that actually plays into competitors' timing preferences. The key to avoiding these timing traps is developing independence of judgment about when action truly serves your interests. This requires creating your own information sources, maintaining your own timeline assessments, and having the courage to resist external pressure when your timing instincts detect manipulation. I learned to create buffer time around apparently urgent decisions. When external pressure suggested immediate action was essential, I would commit to deciding within 24 hours rather than immediately. This brief delay often revealed whether the urgency was genuine or manufactured. Most importantly, I learned that maintaining your timing discipline when others are losing theirs is often the most valuable skill in complex, competitive situations. While opponents react to manufactured urgency, you can position yourself to take advantage of the opportunities their premature actions create. The false dawn banner reminds me that apparent opportunities often come at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. True masters of timing know when to resist the deception of haste and maintain patience for genuinely perfect moments. The bronze weather vane before me points not just to wind direction, but to a deeper truth about perfect timing. It rarely depends on a single favorable condition. This weather vane taught me that mastery lies in orchestrating multiple forces to align simultaneously, creating moments when success becomes inevitable rather than merely possible. My greatest strategic victory required the convergence of 5 separate circumstances, none of which alone would have been sufficient for success. King Wu had been our enemy for 3 years, and his kingdom seemed unassailable. His army was larger than ours, his treasury deeper, his alliances stronger, and his position more defensible. Conventional wisdom said that defeating Wu would require either overwhelming force or extraordinary luck, but I had been observing something that conventional wisdom missed: the rhythm of interconnected circumstances that, if properly aligned, could transform an impossible challenge into an achievable objective. I needed Wu's army to be divided, his treasury strained, his allies distracted, his position weakened, and his attention focused elsewhere. Each condition alone was manageable. All 5 together would be devastating. The first condition was seasonal. Wu's northern territories faced annual flooding that required significant military resources for disaster response and civil order. This flooding was predictable, but its severity varied. I waited 3 years for a flood severe enough to require major troop deployments. The second condition was economic. Wu's prosperity depended on trade routes that passed through territories controlled by his southern neighbor, King Yu. When tensions between Wu and Yu escalated partly through diplomatic pressure, I applied indirectly trade. Disruptions began straining Wu's finances just as flood response demanded increased spending. The third condition was political. Wu's Western ally had his own succession crisis brewing, and I had been cultivating relationships with both potential heirs. When the succession question reached crisis point, this ally became too preoccupied with internal affairs to provide Wu with military support. The fourth condition was strategic. Wu's defensive position was strongest when his forces were concentrated in his capital region, but the combination of northern floods, southern trade disputes, and western political crisis forced him to scatter his forces across multiple territories to address simultaneous problems. The fifth condition was psychological. Wu's king was proud and had never retreated from a challenge. When I began making obvious preparations for an attack, he could easily observe. His pride demanded that he stand and fight rather than withdraw to even stronger defensive positions. For 3 years, I worked to influence these circumstances while patiently waiting for them to converge. I provided intelligence that exacerbated Wu's conflicts with you. I offered support to both sides in the Western succession crisis, ensuring it would last long enough to serve my timing needs. I carefully managed my own military preparations to provoke Wu's pride at exactly the right moment. When all 5 conditions finally aligned, the campaign that should have taken years was completed in 6 weeks. Wu's divided forces couldn't coordinate effective resistance. His strained treasury couldn't sustain prolonged defense. His distracted allies couldn't provide meaningful support. His scattered position couldn't be reinforced quickly enough. His proud king couldn't retreat to safety without losing face. This taught me that perfect timing isn't about finding the right moment. It's about creating the right moment by orchestrating multiple favorable circumstances. Single-factor timing leaves too much to chance. Multi-factor timing makes success nearly inevitable. The challenge is patience. Orchestrating multiple circumstances takes time, sometimes years. During those 3 years of preparation, I faced constant pressure to attack based on partial alignments. When Wu's treasury was strained, advisors urged immediate action. When his army was divided by northern floods, officers pressed for assault. When his allies were distracted, strategists argued that delay would waste opportunity. But I had learned that premature action based on partial alignment often destroys the possibility of full alignment. By attacking when only 2 or 3 conditions favored us, I would have alerted Wu to his vulnerabilities and motivated him to address them before all 5 conditions could converge. The key insight was developing what I call orchestration patience, the ability to work toward multiple goals simultaneously while waiting for their convergence, rather than acting on any single achievement. This requires tracking multiple timelines, maintaining multiple strategies, and resisting the temptation to act on partial success. In modern contexts, this principle applies to every significant career and business decision. The executive seeking to launch a revolutionary product doesn't wait just for market readiness. They orchestrate technological capability, manufacturing capacity, distribution partnerships, competitive positioning, and regulatory approval to align simultaneously. The professional pursuing a major career transition doesn't act on any single opportunity. They build skills, expand networks, accumulate savings, research options, and time market conditions to converge when their move will be most likely to succeed. This approach requires thinking in terms of campaigns rather than battles, orchestrating conditions rather than reacting to them, and maintaining strategic patience while working actively toward convergence, rather than waiting passively for luck. The weather vane reminds me that perfect timing is rarely about a single wind shift. It's about understanding how multiple forces interact and having the patience to wait for their alliance, while actively working to influence their alignment. When circumstances truly converge, victory becomes not just possible but inevitable. The polished bronze shield before me reflects not just light, but one of timing's most subtle truth. Perfect timing isn't only about external conditions, but about understanding the inner psychological state of everyone involved. This mirror shield taught me that the same external moment can be perfectly timed for one person and disastrously timed for another, depending on their mental and emotional readiness. During the siege of Jinyang, I learned this lesson through miscalculation. The fortress had been under siege for 2 months, and every external indicator suggested the moment for final assault had arrived. The walls were breached, supplies were low, and resistance was weakening. But I had focused entirely on these external factors while ignoring the psychological dimension. What I failed to consider was the defender's emotional state. General Han, who commanded Jinyang's defenses, had just received news that his son had been captured by bandits far from the battlefield. A man fighting to save his home will surrender when defeat becomes inevitable. A man fighting to buy time to save his child will fight to the death regardless of strategic logic. My assault, timed perfectly for military conditions, met resistance that defied all rational calculation. Han's desperate energy infected his entire garrison. Men who should have surrendered fought with suicidal intensity. The siege that should have ended in hours stretched into 3 more weeks of bloody combat. This taught me that psychological timing assessment must precede all other timing considerations. The most favorable external conditions mean nothing if the key participants are in psychological states that prevent rational response to those conditions. I developed what I call the inner state mapper, systematic method for assessing the psychological readiness of all parties involved in any significant decision or conflict. This assessment covers 5 psychological dimensions: confidence level, emotional state, attention focus, decision-making capacity, and stress tolerance. Confidence level determines how people interpret ambiguous information. High confidence leads to optimistic interpretations and bold action. Low confidence leads to pessimistic interpretations and hesitant action. The same external conditions will be seen as opportunity by confident people and threat by unconfident people. Emotional state governs the speed and quality of decision. Fear accelerates bad decisions and paralyzes good ones. Anger accelerates all decisions but reduces their quality. Contentment slows all decisions but improves their quality. Desperation makes people willing to accept previously unacceptable options. Attention focus determines what information people process and what they ignore. Scattered attention misses opportunities and threats equally. Hyper-focused attention sees details clearly but misses context. Balanced attention processes both immediate and strategic information effectively. Decision-making capacity varies based on cognitive load and emotional resources. People dealing with multiple stresses make poorer decisions even about familiar situations. People with clear mental space make better decisions even about unfamiliar situations. Stress tolerance affects how people respond to pressure. High stress tolerance individuals perform better under pressure but may underestimate risks. Low stress tolerance individuals perform worse under pressure but may be more cautious about potential problems. During the campaign against General Tzu, I applied this psychological assessment systematically. External conditions favored immediate attack. Tzu's forces were outnumbered and poorly positioned. But my psychological assessment revealed that Tzu was in a state of desperate confidence. His officers were emotionally committed to their cause. Their attention was hyper-focused on defense. Their decision-making capacity was clear because they had simplified their situation to survival, and their stress tolerance was artificially high due to camaraderie and shared purpose. Instead of attacking when external conditions were optimal, I waited until psychological conditions shifted. I used time and indirect pressure to erode their confidence. Emotional solidarity, attention focus, decision-making clarity, and stress tolerance. When their psychology became as vulnerable as their strategic position, the same external attack, conditions that would have failed before succeeded completely. The key insight was learning that people in different psychological states inhabit different timing realities. The moment that seems perfect to you may seem impossible to them, not because they're analyzing different information, but because they're processing the same information through different psychological filters. This principle transforms how you approach every important conversation, negotiation, and decision in modern contexts. Before presenting that crucial proposal to your boss, assess their confidence level about their own performance, their emotional state about company direction, their attention focus on immediate versus strategic issues, their decision capacity given current pressures, and their stress tolerance for additional complexity. The presentation that gets enthusiastic approval when delivered to a confident, calm, focused, clear-thinking, stress-resilient leader will get reflexive rejection when delivered to an insecure, anxious, distracted, overloaded, stress-sensitive leader. Even if the content is identical, managing your own psychology for perfect timing is equally important. I learned to monitor my internal state as carefully as external conditions. Desperation makes you see opportunity where none exists. Overconfidence makes you ignore timing signals that suggest patience. Fear makes you miss genuine opportunities. Anger makes you act too quickly. Contentment makes you act too slowly. The mirror shield reminds me that perfect timing requires understanding both the external moment and the internal readiness of everyone involved. External conditions create the potential for perfect timing. Psychological conditions determine whether that potential becomes reality. The broken spear before me tells the story of my most costly timing error. An attack launched one crucial moment too late that shattered not just this weapon, but nearly ended my military career. This spear represents a harsh truth about timing. The consequences of mistiming often extend far beyond the immediate failure, creating ripple effects that can haunt you for years. The Battle of Changshan should have been my greatest triumph. For months, I had maneuvered the rebel army of General Pang into an impossible position. He was trapped in a valley with limited supplies, poor defensive positions, and no viable escape routes. More importantly, my intelligence network had discovered that his forces were planning to surrender at dawn. I had achieved perfect strategic positioning through patient timing. All I needed to do was maintain siege positions through the night and accept Pang's surrender in the morning. Victory without bloodshed, reputation enhanced, strategic objectives achieved, everything a commander could hope for. But pride poisoned my timing judgment. As night fell, reports reached me that Pang's officers were arguing among themselves, that discipline was breaking down, that some units were already laying down arms. The temptation to claim immediate victory rather than wait for morning surrender became overwhelming. I convinced myself that attacking at midnight would prevent any possibility of escape attempts or changes of heart. I rationalized that swift action would minimize casualties. I argued that delayed victory might allow enemy reinforcements to arrive. Every excuse masked the real reason I wanted the dramatic triumph of a night assault rather than the anticlimactic acceptance of surrender. So I ordered the attack. 6 hours before dawn, one crucial moment, too late for surprise, but too early for surrender. My forces descended into the valley under cover of darkness, expecting to overwhelm demoralized defenders. Instead, we found an enemy that, sensing imminent attack, had used those same hours to consolidate their positions and prepare final defenses. The battle that should have been avoided entirely became the bloodiest of my career. What should have been a bloodless victory became a Pyrrhic triumph that cost 800 lives and nearly cost me command. This spear shattered as I fought desperately to salvage victory from a timing disaster of my own creation. The immediate cost was devastating, but the ripple effects proved even more damaging. Word spread throughout the military hierarchy that I had thrown away a perfect strategic position for the sake of personal glory. Officers who had respected my timing skills began to question my judgment. Soldiers who had trusted my decision-making became hesitant in future engagements. More subtly, the mistake damaged my own confidence in timing assessment. For months afterward, I second-guessed every timing decision, paralyzed by fear of repeating such a costly error. This self-doubt created its own timing problems, as I hesitated when decisive action was needed and acted when patience was required. The psychological impact extended to my entire command structure. Officers who had seen me make a timing mistake began making their own timing errors, either from reduced confidence in their abilities or from overcompensating by taking excessive risks to prove their boldness. Most damaging was the strategic cost. Other enemy commanders learned from Pang's experience that my timing could be manipulated through appealing to my pride. Future opponents would create apparent opportunities for dramatic victory, knowing that I might choose theatrical success over practical efficiency. This taught me that timing mistakes are uniquely expensive because they affect not just immediate outcomes but future timing capabilities. A strategic error costs you one engagement. A timing error damages your timing sense itself, making future timing errors more likely. I learned to distinguish between timing mistakes caused by insufficient information and those caused by psychological distortion. Information-based timing errors can be corrected through better intelligence and analysis. Psychology-based timing errors require deeper self-awareness and emotional discipline. The Changshan disaster was entirely psychological. I had perfect information about the strategic situation, clear understanding of optimal timing, and obvious knowledge that patience would achieve my objectives. But pride distorted my judgment and made me choose inferior timing for superior drama. Recovery from major timing mistakes requires more than analyzing what went wrong. It requires rebuilding the psychological foundations that support good timing judgment. I had to address the pride that caused the error, the self-doubt that followed it, and the reputation damage that affected how others responded to my timing decisions. The process took 2 years and involved deliberately choosing practical efficiency over dramatic flair in dozens of smaller decisions. I had to prove to myself and others that I could value effective timing more than impressive timing, that I could choose patient victory over spectacular victory. Most importantly, I learned that timing mistakes teach lessons that success cannot. Perfect timing can become routine and unremarkable. Mistiming forces you to understand timing's true importance and complexity in ways that successful timing never does. In modern contexts, timing mistakes carry similar compounding costs. The executive who launches a product at the wrong moment doesn't just lose that opportunity, they damage their credibility for future timing decisions. The professional who asks for a promotion at the wrong time doesn't just get rejected, they signal poor judgment that affects how future requests are received. The broken spear reminds me that Mr. Ming's true cost isn't the immediate failure, but the damage to your timing capabilities that makes future success more difficult to achieve. The specially designed torch before me burns with a flame that revolutionized warfare and taught me that mastery sometimes requires abandoning conventional timing wisdom to create entirely new patterns of opportunity. This night attack torch enabled my most innovative victory and proved that perfect timing sometimes means breaking timing rules that everyone else follows. For centuries, military doctrine held that night attacks were too dangerous to attempt. Armies couldn't coordinate. In darkness, soldiers couldn't distinguish friend from enemy, and commanders couldn't control complex maneuvers without visual communication. Every military text warned against night operations except in the most desperate circumstances, but I had been observing something that conventional wisdom missed: how these same limitations that made night attacks dangerous for the attacker also made night defense nearly impossible for the defender. If I could solve the coordination problem that plagued night operations, I could exploit the defender's inability to respond effectively to unexpected assault. The innovation began with this torch. Working with our military engineers, I designed a flame that burned with distinctive blue-white light, easily distinguishable from ordinary fires, even in complete darkness. Each of my units carried torches with slightly different light patterns, some steady, some flickering in specific rhythms, some arranged in particular formations. More importantly, I developed new timing patterns that no enemy would expect, because no army had ever used them before. Instead of attacking at the conventional times, dawn for maximum visibility, dusk for cover of approaching darkness, she chose deep midnight, when enemy sentries were most tired and least alert. The fortress of Kushan had withstood siege for 4 months using conventional defensive timing. Their guards changed shifts at predictable intervals. Their patrols followed established routes. Their response protocols were designed for daylight attacks and siege warfare. They had prepared for every conventional assault pattern, but none for coordinated night attack. My forces moved in complete silence until we were positioned at 3 points around the fortress walls. Then, at the signal of a distinctive torch pattern, we attacked simultaneously from all directions, using light signals to coordinate our advance. The defenders, awakened suddenly from sleep, faced an assault they had never trained to repel using methods they had never encountered. The psychological impact was as devastating as the tactical surprise. Soldiers trained to fight in daylight found themselves in a chaotic environment where normal rules didn't apply. Officers couldn't see their men or assess the situation. Standard defensive responses proved inadequate for unprecedented attack. Patterns: the fortress fell in 3 hours faster than most daylight assaults against much weaker positions. More importantly, word of this impossible victory spread throughout the region, creating a reputation for unpredictability that often led to surrender before battle was joined. This taught me that innovative timing creates advantages that conventional timing cannot achieve. When everyone follows the same timing patterns, those patterns become predictable and defendable. When you create new timing patterns, you force opponents to respond to situations they haven't prepared for. The key insight was understanding that timing conventions exist for good reasons, but those reasons can become outdated or overcome through innovation. Night attacks were dangerous when armies lacked coordination methods. They became advantageous when new coordination methods made them feasible. Developing innovative timing requires studying why conventional timing patterns exist, then finding ways to overcome the limitations that created those patterns. Most people accept timing conventions as immutable laws. Innovators see them as problems to be solved. I learned to identify timing patterns that everyone followed but no one questioned. Why did armies attack at dawn? Because that's when visibility was best. Why did negotiations happen in formal settings? Because that's where authority was clearest. Why did campaigns begin in spring? Because that's when supply lines were most reliable. Each conventional pattern represented an opportunity for innovation if its underlying assumptions could be challenged successfully. The dawn attack assumption assumed that visibility favored attackers more than defenders. The formal negotiation assumption assumed that structure favored agreement more than flexibility. The spring campaign assumption assumed that supply advantages outweighed surprise benefits. Innovation in timing also required accepting higher initial risk for potentially greater rewards. My first night attack could have been a complete disaster if the coordination methods failed, but the potential advantage of completely surprising an enemy justified the risk of tactical failure. In modern contexts, innovative timing follows the same principles. Everyone knows you don't launch products during economic downturns, but downturns also mean less competition and lower marketing costs. Everyone knows you don't change jobs during industry upheaval, but upheaval also creates new opportunities and reduces competition for the best positions. The most successful timing innovators I've observed share certain characteristics. They study conventional timing patterns until they understand their underlying logic. They identify when those patterns have become so universal that following them provides no advantage. They develop new methods to overcome the limitations that created conventional patterns, and they accept higher risk for the potential of breakthrough results. Creating new timing patterns often requires multiple iterations. My night attack method evolved through smaller experiments: night reconnaissance, pre-dawn raids, coordinated torch signals before achieving full innovation in large-scale assault. Each experiment taught lessons that informed the next development. The night attack torch reminds me that perfect timing sometimes means creating perfect moments rather than finding them. When conventional timing patterns become too predictable, innovation becomes necessary for maintaining competitive advantage. The greatest timing masters don't just read existing patterns, they create new ones. The war drum before me carries more than rhythm, it carries the secret of how perfect timing can be shared and synchronized across thousands of people simultaneously. This signal drum taught me that individual timing mastery means little unless you can transmit that mastery to others and coordinate their actions with your own vision of the perfect moment. During the campaign against the coalition armies of Three Kingdoms, I faced a challenge that no individual timing skill could solve. My forces were spread across a front spanning 50 miles, with 7 separate divisions that needed to coordinate attacks against multiple enemy positions simultaneously. Each division had different terrain, different opponents, and different tactical challenges, yet all needed to act as one coordinated force at precisely the right moment. The battle plan required perfect timing on an unprecedented scale. The northern divisions would engage first to draw enemy reserves away from the center. The eastern divisions would attack exactly 1 hour later to exploit the weakened center. The western divisions would strike 2 hours after the initial engagement to complete the encirclement. The southern divisions would move 3 hours later to cut off retreat routes. Any deviation from this timing would be catastrophic. If the northern attack came too early, it would alert enemies to our intentions. If the eastern attack came too late, enemy reserves would have time to reposition. If the western strike was mistimed, it would meet reinforced rather than weakened positions. If the southern movement was off schedule, enemy forces would escape to fight another day. I realized that my personal timing mastery was worthless unless I could transmit that same precision to dozens of commanders across vast distances. This war drum became the foundation of what I developed: a system for teaching and coordinating timing sense throughout an entire army. The first challenge was teaching others to recognize the same timing signals I had learned to read. I couldn't be present at every engagement to assess energy levels, attention patterns, and emotional states. My division commanders needed to develop their own timing sense while remaining coordinated with the overall strategy. I developed what I call timing training through progressive observation exercises. Each commander would spend weeks learning to read timing signals in increasingly complex situations, first with individual soldiers, then small units, then large formations, finally with enemy forces. They learned to distinguish between surface indicators and deep timing patterns. More importantly, they learned to calibrate their timing assessments with mine. We would observe the same situations simultaneously and compare our readings of energy, attention, and emotional states. Over time, their timing sense began to align with mine, creating what I call timing synchronization across the command structure. The coordination challenge was even more complex. Each division commander needed to maintain awareness of local timing conditions while responding to signals about overall strategic timing. The drum system became our solution. Different rhythms indicated different phases of the coordinated attack, allowing local commanders to adapt their specific timing to the strategic timeline. But the most difficult aspect was maintaining timing discipline across large groups under pressure. Individual soldiers, when stressed or excited, tend to act prematurely or hesitate excessively. Teaching them to maintain timing discipline despite emotional pressure required different methods than teaching timing recognition. I learned that timing discipline in groups requires shared understanding of why timing matters, personal trust in leadership's timing assessment, clear signals about when timing changes, and immediate consequences for timing violations that undermine group coordination. During the coalition battle, the timing transmission system faced its ultimate test. 7 divisions across 50 miles had to coordinate their attacks according to a complex timing sequence while adapting to changing local conditions. The drum signals had to convey not just when to act, but when to adjust timing based on unexpected developments. The northern engagement proceeded exactly on schedule. The eastern attack came precisely 1 hour later and found weakened positions as planned. The western strike hit its targets at the optimal moment when enemy reserves were committed elsewhere. The southern movement completed the encirclement without allowing significant enemy escape. The victory was total, but more importantly, it proved that perfect timing could be systematically transmitted and coordinated across large organizations. The individual timing mastery I had developed over years of practice had become organizational timing capability that multiplied effectiveness far beyond what individual skill could achieve. This experience taught me that timing mastery has 3 levels: personal timing sense for individual decisions, interpersonal timing coordination for small group actions, and organizational timing systems for large-scale coordination. Each level requires different skills and methods. In modern contexts, this principle applies to every leadership situation where individual timing excellence must become group timing capability. The executive with perfect market timing must transmit that sense to sales teams, product developers, and strategic planners. The project manager with excellent deadline timing must coordinate that precision across multiple departments and external partners. Building organizational timing capability requires developing timing assessment skills throughout the team, creating coordination systems that maintain timing precision under pressure, establishing timing discipline that prevents premature or delayed action, and designing communication methods that transmit timing changes quickly and accurately. The signal drum reminds me that perfect timing becomes truly powerful only when it can be shared, taught, and coordinated across all the people whose actions determine success or failure. The scroll before me documents something most strategists never consider: how timing patterns themselves evolve and change over time. This changing seasons scroll taught me that timing mastery isn't a destination you reach, but a continuous Adaptation to shifting patterns that require constant learning and adjustment throughout your entire career. When I first began studying timing, I believed that mastering the fundamental principles would give me permanent advantage. I thought that once I understood energy cycles, attention patterns, and emotional rhythms, one could apply these insights consistently across all situations. This assumption nearly cost me everything during the campaign against General Joe's son, who had inherited his father's command, but brought an entirely different approach to warfare. The elder Joe had been predictable in his timing patterns. He attacked at dawn, defended during midday, and regrouped at dusk. His energy peaked in morning hours, his attention focused during afternoon planning sessions, and his emotions remained steady throughout each engagement. After fighting him for 2 years, I could anticipate his timing with remarkable accuracy. His son, Chen, was different in ways that made my accumulated timing knowledge initially useless. He preferred night operations when his father had avoided them. He made crucial decisions during emotional peaks when conventional wisdom suggested waiting for rational calm. He committed reserves when traditional timing said to hold them back. He retreated when timing indicators suggested advance, and advanced when they suggested retreat. My first 3 engagements with Chen were disasters because I was reading timing patterns that no longer applied. I was anticipating behavior-based on timing principles that Chen either didn't know or deliberately violated. I was applying timing mastery developed for one type of opponent to a completely different type of challenge. This forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Timing patterns evolve as people learn, adapt, and innovate. The timing principles that give you advantage today become common knowledge tomorrow. The patterns that seemed universal in one era become obsolete in the next. Timing mastery requires continuous evolution rather than static application of learned principles. I had to develop what I call adaptive timing sense, the ability to recognize when established patterns are changing and adjust my timing assessment accordingly. This required distinguishing between timeless timing principles and era-specific timing patterns. The timeless principles remained constant. Energy rises and falls in predictable cycles. Attention has limited capacity and shifts focus regularly. Emotions influence decision-making in measurable ways. But the specific manifestations of these principles changed as opponents became more sophisticated in their timing awareness. Chen understood conventional timing patterns well enough to deliberately violate them for strategic advantage. He would attack when tired to surprise enemies expecting him to rest. He would make emotional decisions because opponents anticipated rational delay. He would hold reserves beyond normal commitment points because enemies expected earlier reinforcement. Adapting to Chen required developing timing flexibility, the ability to read both conventional and unconventional timing patterns simultaneously. I had to maintain awareness of what traditional timing suggested, while remaining alert to signs that Chen was operating according to different timing logic. The breakthrough came when I realized that Chen's innovative timing patterns had their own internal consistency. He wasn't randomly violating timing principles, he was following alternative timing principles that created different but equally predictable patterns. Once I decoded his timing logic, I could anticipate his unconventional timing as accurately as I had anticipated his father's conventional timing. This taught me that timing mastery has developmental stages. Initial timing sense focuses on learning fundamental patterns. Intermediate timing skill involves applying these patterns across different situations. Advanced timing mastery requires recognizing when patterns are changing and adapting your timing assessment accordingly. The highest level of timing mastery involves contributing to timing pattern evolution by creating new timing approaches that others must adapt to. Just as Chen had evolved beyond his father's timing patterns, I began developing timing innovations that would force future opponents to evolve beyond conventional timing wisdom. In modern contexts, this evolutionary principle applies to every field where timing provides competitive advantage. Marketing timing patterns that worked 5 years ago may be obsolete today as consumer attention patterns shift. Investment timing strategies that succeeded in previous market cycles may fail in current conditions. Career timing approaches that advanced previous generations may hinder current professionals. The key insight is that timing mastery requires both mastering current patterns and anticipating how those patterns will evolve. This involves studying how timing patterns have changed in your field over time, identifying the forces that drive timing pattern evolution, developing sensitivity to early signals that establish patterns are shifting, and maintaining flexibility to adapt your timing approach as patterns change. Most importantly, it requires accepting that your current timing mastery is temporary. The patterns you've learned to read will evolve. The techniques you've mastered will become outdated. The timing sense you've developed will need continuous updating to remain effective. The changing season scroll reminds me that timing, like nature itself, follows cycles of stability and change. Mastery means learning current patterns while remaining ready to evolve beyond them as circumstances change and new patterns emerge. Perfect timing isn't about finding eternal principles. It's about maintaining the agility to recognize and adapt to timing patterns as they evolve throughout your career and across changing circumstances. The victory seal before me bears the mark I pressed into documents that changed the course of history, and it taught me timing's most profound lesson. Perfect timing creates effects that extend far beyond the immediate moment, building compound advantages that shape the future for generations. This seal represents how single moments of perfect timing can create lasting impact that multiplies across time. The Battle of Helu was not my largest victory in terms of forces engaged or territory gained, but it became my most consequential because I understood something that most commanders miss: timing's legacy effect. When you achieve victory through perfect timing rather than overwhelming force, you create ripple effects that influence every future engagement. King Helu commanded forces roughly equal to mine, held a strong defensive position, and had proven himself a capable strategist in previous campaigns. Conventional analysis suggested that defeating him would require either superior numbers, better positioning, or prolonged siege warfare. But I had observed something more subtle, an opportunity for a timing-based victory that would achieve far more than tactical success. Helu's kingdom stood at the center of a complex web of alliances and rivalries among neighboring states. His allies supported him partly from genuine friendship, but mostly because they feared his military capabilities. His enemies avoided direct confrontation because they respected his strategic skills. His own people followed him because they believed in his invincibility. I realized that defeating Helu through perfect timing in a way that demonstrated superior strategic insight rather than superior force would shatter not just his army, but the entire perception of his capabilities. This would cause his allies to reconsider their commitments, his enemies to become more aggressive, and his people to question his leadership. The moment came when Helu made a tactically sound but strategically revealing decision. Faced with reports of enemy activity on multiple fronts, he divided his forces to address each threat simultaneously. This division was militarily logical and demonstrated good crisis management, but it also revealed his response patterns to complex pressure. Instead of attacking his divided forces immediately, which would have provided tactical victory but limited strategic impact, I waited for the perfect moment that would maximize the legacy effect. I allowed his divided forces to successfully address the multiple threats, then struck precisely when they were regrouping and when Helu's confidence was highest from having managed the crisis successfully. The timing created a devastating psychological impact. Helu and his forces had just proven their competence by handling multiple challenges simultaneously. They were feeling confident and secure when my attack came from an unexpected direction at an unexpected moment. The defeat was absolute, not just tactically, but psychologically. More importantly, the method of victory demonstrated timing mastery that transcended conventional military thinking. Word spread throughout the region that Sun Tzu had defeated a respected commander, not through superior numbers or better equipment, but through superior understanding of when to act. This reputation for perfect timing became a strategic weapon more powerful than any army. The legacy effects unfolded exactly as anticipated. Helu's former allies began seeking accommodation with me rather than honoring their commitments to him. His former enemies became emboldened to challenge his weakened position. His own people began questioning whether their leader possessed the strategic insight necessary to protect them. But the most significant legacy effect was the impact on future opponents. Commanders who might have challenged me under normal circumstances became hesitant to engage, not because they feared my forces, but because they feared my timing. They knew that I could turn apparent weakness into devastating strength through superior timing sense. This taught me that perfect timing creates compound advantages that multiply over time. A single moment of perfect timing can establish reputation, influence future opportunities, alter opponent behavior, attract better allies, and create psychological momentum that lasts far beyond the immediate victory. The compound advantage principle applies to every significant timing decision in modern contexts. The professional who demonstrates perfect timing in one crucial presentation doesn't just advance that project, they establish a reputation for excellent judgment that influences how future opportunities are offered to them. The entrepreneur who times their market entry perfectly doesn't just achieve initial success, they create credibility with investors, customers, and partners that makes future timing decisions easier and more impactful. The leader who demonstrates perfect timing in organizational change doesn't just accomplish that specific transformation, they build trust and confidence that makes future change initiatives more likely to succeed. Building legacy through perfect timing requires thinking beyond immediate results to long-term implications. This means considering how your timing decisions will be perceived and remembered, anticipating how current timing mastery will influence future opportunities, understanding how timing reputation creates compound advantages, and designing timing decisions to maximize both immediate and legacy benefits. Most importantly, it means recognizing that perfect timing becomes part of your personal and professional identity. People begin to expect superior timing from you, which creates both opportunity and pressure. Future timing decisions are evaluated not just on their own merits, but in the context of your timing reputation. The victory seal reminds me that the moments when you demonstrate perfect timing become defining moments that shape how others perceive your capabilities and how future opportunities present themselves. Perfect timing doesn't just achieve immediate objectives, it builds the foundation for future success by establishing your mastery of one of leadership's most crucial skills. Before me lies my final teaching tool, a compass that points not to magnetic north, but to the eternal principles of timing that transcend any era, any battlefield, any challenge you will ever face. This timeless compass taught me that while the circumstances change, while the tools evolve, while the opponents adapt, the fundamental art of perfect timing remains constant across all human endeavors. As I near the end of my years and reflect on a lifetime spent mastering timing's mysteries, I see now that everything I have shared with you, every principle, every technique, every hard-won insight, points to a simple truth. Perfect timing is not about the external world. It is about developing the internal wisdom to recognize when all forces align in your favor, and having the courage to act on that recognition. The broken sundial taught me that timing isn't about clocks and calendars. The meditation stone showed That patience is active preparation, not passive waiting. The eagle feather revealed that subtle signs often herald the most significant opportunities. Each artifact, each battle, each victory and defeat contributed to understanding that has taken me decades to develop. But here is what I want you to understand above all else. You do not need decades to begin applying these principles. You do not need to command armies to practice perfect timing. You do not need to face life and death decisions to develop timing mastery. Every day presents you with opportunities to read the invisible currents, to practice strategic patience, to recognize the perfect moment, and to act with precision when that moment arrives. The executive, waiting for the right moment to propose a bold strategy, is practicing the same art I used before the Battle of Boyu. The professional timing their career move is applying the same principles I employed during the siege of Yu. The entrepreneur launching their venture is reading the same convergence of circumstances I orchestrated against King Wu. The scale is different, but the art remains identical. Energy still rises and falls in predictable patterns. Attention still has limited capacity and shifts focus regularly. Emotions still influence decisions in measurable ways. The three invisible forces that governed ancient battlefields govern modern boardrooms, negotiation tables, and career decisions. What has changed since my time is the speed at which conditions shift and the complexity of circumstances you must navigate. What has not changed is the fundamental human nature that creates timing opportunities and the strategic principles that allow you to recognize and seize those opportunities. I challenge you to begin developing your timing sense immediately. Start by observing the people you interact with daily. Notice their energy patterns throughout the day, the week, the month. Learn to read their attention cycles and emotional rhythms. Practice recognizing the 3-second windows when their true state becomes visible. Apply the principles systematically to your most important goals. Identify what convergence of circumstances would create perfect timing for your next career move, your next project, your next crucial conversation. Then work actively to influence those circumstances while patiently waiting for their alignment. Most importantly, develop the courage to act when perfect timing arrives. Recognition without action is worthless. Analysis without execution achieves nothing. The moment when all forces align in your favor is precious and brief. You must be ready to move with the speed of strike. When that moment comes, remember that perfect timing multiplies whatever efforts you apply. The same proposal presented at the perfect moment achieves 10 times the impact of perfect content presented at the wrong time. The same skills, applied when timing conditions are favorable, create opportunities that no amount of additional skill could generate under poor timing conditions. Build your timing legacy by making each perfectly timed decision. Establish your reputation for strategic excellence. Let others come to expect superior timing from you. Use timing mastery to create compound advantages that accelerate your progress toward every goal that matters to you. Finally, never forget that timing mastery is an art that evolves throughout your entire career. The patterns you learn today will need adaptation as circumstances change. The techniques that serve you now will require refinement as you face new challenges. Remain humble before timing's complexity, while confident in your growing ability to master its principles. The timeless compass reminds me that perfect timing is humanity's eternal challenge and opportunity. Whether you lead armies or teams, build kingdoms or companies, fight battles or compete for promotions, the art of perfect timing will determine more of your success than any other single skill. You can develop, carry forward what I have taught. You honor these principles by putting them into practice. Let my experience guide your decisions, but trust your own timing instincts as they develop through application and experience. The art of perfect timing belongs to those who commit themselves to mastering it. The perfect moment belongs to those who recognize it and act with precision when it arrives. Your time is now.